Welcome, everybody. I'm going to mute everybody for a moment. Then I'm going to mute you, and then you can unmute yourself if you have a question. Okay. Wow, we have a very nice group here tonight, and this is very exciting. I'm going to welcome, you can unmute yourself. If you're not familiar with Zoom, you're able to unmute yourself if you have a question, and you are encouraged to ask questions. Just going to take one more minute to let other people come. It's the first night. So sit back and we'll start in 1 minute. Wow, this is a really beautiful turnout. Yeah, I think we doubled our record for our previous Tanya class, so this is looking pretty amazing. All right. I'm going to start with actually welcoming every individual who made the time to be there. If I recognize you or if I see your name, we have people from Rochester, as well as people from beyond. I'm getting a text here of some people trying to log in. Just trying to make sure as I do my own makeup and tech IT. All right. So I'm going to just see the list of people. This is a special group. Everybody that's come here has come obviously because they've heard of the Tanya or they read the blurb and it spoke to them to some degree. This idea of digging deeper into our psyche, into our soul, and hopefully learning some ideas, some terms, some self-definition in order to apply them and live deeper, richer, more spiritual lives. So welcome Beverly, Gavin, Bethel, Irina, Lisa, Louise, Mark, nice to see you. My sister, Kaya, nice to have you join us. And Nelson, owner, I don't know, your name is not, I don't know which person is owner. Paulina and Larry, Sharon, Schiffer, and Wendy. And Lee, I think Lee just signed it. Nice to have you join the show. All righty. So I might get some text in the middle of people trying to log in and have to respond. Okay. So before we start about the Tanya, just as some practical notes, I'm going to share my screen, or if you're joining in by phone for some reason, I'm going to show you the books that we're using. So if you are, I want to make sure everybody can see. How do I get the view of that plus? Why can't I see everybody? All right, so just because it was blocking my view of people, the Tanya was written in 1792 after many years of field work by the author, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, counseling people, seekers, and I'm going to pull up a picture of him. So here's a picture of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chabad and the author of this famous book. He wrote the book back then. He lived in those years, and he published the book in 1972. It was printed in 1792 and printed in 1796, and it became very, very popular. As far as what we're going to use as a text, we have three options. I mentioned that some of that in the email. One is new share. One is a book that was put out a few years ago with it's a translation with annotation, and it's called The Practical Tanya. It's sort of a great happy medium between the very, very academic works on this book and a colloquial, practical layman's terms edition. So I would recommend, if you'd like to purchase a book, you can purchase this book. You don't have to, because I'm going to say there's another version online for free. Another book, and I can send the links by the chat after the class if you're interested, or you can email me. If you don't have my email, it's info@jewishpittsford.com. Another book that I only discovered a couple of years ago is the Cliff's Notes on Tanya, literally. It's called Sparks of Tanya. Both the books are available on Amazon. And what's nice about this book is that it's summaries. So as you'll see, and if you've got a chance to read beforehand, the Tanya it's Jewish text. It brings a lot of Talmud, or it's translated from the Hebrew. It's understandable, but even in the translation, some of it gets lost in translation, or it might be a little more transferring. What's nice about this book is that it's a summary. I actually posted in the email for those of you that registered. From now on, the email will come only to you, that email list, and you'll get a summary and a link to the last section, which is, I'm going to post the last share, is, where was that? I lost that. Okay. New share. On Chabad.org, they have one of the original translations. It was Lessons in Tanya, and I think it was nice to hear. I think Lee mentioned that he has this book for many years, and he got a chance to whip it out and use it. So it's great. But it's online for free on Chabad.org. and I will send a link to the chapter every week to this site, and you can read it on your phone, on your iPad, your computer, so you can read before and if you'd like. If you can't read before, it's okay. The ideas will be explained, but you'll have more background and you'll probably have better questions if you read beforehand. Okay. So, just so we get a little participation, would anybody like to share what they're hoping, what they've heard about the Tanya, what they would like to get out of this book before I go on? Not all at once. I'll unmute everybody.
So,
Sorry, you know what? I'm going to mute you.
okay.
If you want to say something, unmute yourself. Otherwise, we'll hear too much background noise.
So, hi, Rabbi. This is Lee. Can you hear me?
Yes, Lee, we hear you.
Okay. So I don't know if video is playing today, but maybe next week. My experience with reading the Tanya is that usually it's imbued with layers and layers and layers of meaning. And so not to be able to get it all on one read through, but certainly to begin to push through some of the essences that come that are embodied in the book. I guess that would be a goal of mine.
That's a good goal. Okay, anybody else want to share something they've heard, or what sparked them to want to tackle this relatable yet, classical Jewish book of philosophy, culling a lot from Kabbalistic spiritual ideas?
Rabbi, it's Sharon Stiller. And when I went to your daughter's Bas Mitzvah, her speech about the Tanya got me fascinated. I had never heard anything about the Tanya before. So that's why I decided that I wanted to, I think I might have mentioned it to you later on, but I decided I wanted to learn something about it. So I'm so glad that you're having this class.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Okay, let's move on now to, we'll move on a little bit here. So, very brief summary, because I mentioned this last week, but for those that are just tuning in, the Tanya is a very famous central book of Jewish philosophy based on Kabbalah. It is the foundation of Chabad Hasidic ideology. It was authored by Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who I showed you on the screen before, and he writes that this wasn't a one-year, sabbatical type of project that he put it to paper. There's a tradition. This took him 20 years to write, and he was a genius, and he had authored other books. He was a renowned Talmudic and Kabbalistic genius in his time, and yet he took 20 years to have the perfect wording. And we see a lot of times, there's a lot of academics that analyze why he did the sequence in certain ways and the word usage, or why did he skip out certain words. It was finally finished in 1792, and it went around back then in handwritten manuscript form that was copied hand by hand. Eventually, he had a very expensive project, but because some errors were creeping in, he had it printed in 1796. Really, chapter 1, in a sense, is the second chapter, because the introduction, some people would consider it a chapter in its own right. I personally, I read books, I skip the introduction. But in this case, the introduction is, in many cases, the introduction tells you where the book is headed. But he answers he says one important thing in the introduction that's relevant to get started. And that is that he did not write this book out of ideas. Because if he wrote the book out of ideas, as great of a genius as he might be, and so on and so forth, usually different ideas speak to different people. And if he wrote, it wouldn't be, useful to the wide the wide spiritual group he would like to reach. And he actually said most books cannot, he says in general, books have a problem. Books, people take them in different ways. Even Torah books that are calling on divine wisdom, different areas of divine knowledge speak to different souls in different ways. But he says, I'm speaking to people that I know, meaning back then I'm speaking to many, many people, thousands of people that have came to him in person to seek his guidance. And I know my audience. And these chapters are really coming from the advice, the counseling that I gave to people over a very lengthy period. In other words, he wrote this book after dealing with a lot of case studies, and not just as a psychologist, but he wrote this as we're talking as a spiritual therapist, a spiritual leader, a one-on-one counselor, a spiritual coach, a great scholar in Talmudic, in biblical and Kabbalistic studies. And he wrote this book knowing the people, the very wide types of range of people. And therefore, this book had such popularity back then. It was by far the most popular Hasidic self-help book at the time, because it wasn't just, although it calls on tremendous ideas and esoteric wisdom, but it's a book meant to give advice to help you be a better person. He happens to have the span of Jewish literature and Torah wisdom at his fingertips, and he was an original thinker as well. But it was made and written and 20 years formulated so that it could be useful to the widest audience. And its centuries-long popularity is testament to that. Okay. So, just one more interesting thing to think about. We're going to go chapter by chapter, but that would be sometimes looking at the trees and missing the forest. So in his title page, which we're not going to do, he says a very important idea. A story, really he's talking about a Talmudic story of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was a great sage, and he said, no one ever got the best of me, I guess, in his intellectual sparring, except a couple people, he named them, and one of them was a young boy. And the young boy was as follows. I was traveling to a city. I came to a crossroads, a fork in the road. There was a young boy there, and the young boy, I asked, you're a native, which way is to the city? And the young boy said, well, to the right is the short, long way, and to the left is the long, short way. So as he thought, sounds the same, he took the first one, the short, long way. And 10 minutes later, he was right outside the city he was looking to enter. But, just one second. Trying to see how to do something. Oh, there we go. I'm going to spotlight the video myself just so you can see me in all my glory, as well as I'm not just one of the Brady Bunch tiles. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, he went there, and it was very short, but when he got there, it was ultimately long because there was this big wall in the way. He goes back to the fork. He sees the boy, says, you were being smart with me, young man. You told me this is the short way. And the boy said, well, didn't I tell you it's the short, long way? And the long, short way was the other option. He goes there, and it was much longer. It was around the mountain. It was around, I guess, the barrier that stood in front of there was a natural barrier in the other way, and he goes around it, but eventually he gets into the city. It was long, but ultimately short. And that is a parable for How do we approach God? So there's different ways to approach God. One of them is an emotional path. The emotional path is a very short way because you can get into it. For example, a great analogy was given. Imagine, I'm not particularly a football fan, and I've never been to a football stadium, but I can imagine in some sports events that I have been to, when you go to any big, large theater event or stadium event, and the fans are really getting excited. There's a certain energy, an emotional energy in the air. And even someone that has no clue what football is or cares about football, they start having a feeling, they start rooting for a team. And that's the idea of the emotional path to building a relationship with something. It could be football, or in a larger sense, it would be to God. Okay, so the other way is to analyze and understand the ideas behind the thing you're trying to have a relationship or build a relationship towards. And that is much longer. It's a longer path because you have to understand it, you have to dissect it, you have to then apply it to yourself. But ultimately, the knowledge becomes you. And the relationship is not outside of you or dependent upon external factors or a bunch of fans or a bunch of circumstances. Knowledge becomes you. And it's a longer path, but it's shorter in the sense you build a more sustainable relationship with the thing you're learning about. And this book was written for people, for his Jewish audience back then in Russia. I'm actually going to cancel the spotlight. It's easier for me to. It was easier for him. He said that there was different paths. One was join a Hasidic community, was very fiery, was very full of emotion and love and joy and prayer. And those are beautiful things. We're not going to talk about the history of the Hasidic movement. But he said the challenge of that is that's dependent upon outside factors. It's very short to get it going, but it's not as sustainable. It needs outside. You need to have a community. He said the other way, the intellectual or the analytical, self-aware way is much longer. It's brutal. It's honesty. It's a lot of knowing what you don't know. So it's longer, but it's ultimately shorter. And with God, with the abstract, he pioneered this system called the Chabad School of Thought, which Chabad is an acronym for Chachma Bina Das, which is different processes of intellectual comprehension of any topic, and the topic at hand of God and the soul and spirituality. And he made a very, very well-written book. You can tell her to pick up. A very well-written book that helps you take the long, short way, analyzing chapter to chapter, seeing it in yourself, having an aha moment. And that is that. I'm going to share the screen as we start chapter 1. Any questions on what I just spoke about? If you'd like to say something, please. Second.
Hi, it's Lee again.
Hi, Lee. How are you?
Okay. Question. So the book was printed, and I guess I'm hearing in my mind that how many people could have access to it, and was that the major vehicle that he used to convey his message, as opposed to did he go around to certain towns, small towns, large towns, and preach or in some way orally communicate his message?
Great question. And if maybe you have either you're 2 for 2 or you've read a little bit about this before. He writes introduction that originally he would go around, or more people would come to him, to his base, and seek an audience with him. and more than once. You forget. It's like therapists. It's like a spiritual therapist. They would come orally, and he says that after a certain point, it was impossible. It was impossible to keep up, individual guidance. In general, a Hasidic master is a spiritual guide. A Rebbe is a spiritual, not just like a teacher, but really someone you bond yourself to, who will guide you and be there for you and give you a path in the service of the divine. Both collective path for their group or world Jewry, and as well as everybody's individual path. At a certain point, it was impossible, so he had to commit it to writing. But I was mentioning before in the intro, it was really, he says, here's all the reasons why writing a book for self-help, for spiritual self-help, will not work. And he lists a bunch of reasons. I mentioned, everybody takes the book differently, so on and so forth. But he says, but I know my audience. And back then I meant I'm talking to the people of the Hasidic brethren, his disciples, people that were students or that milieu. But we actually, there's a tradition for the past few hundred years by the great teachers of the Tanya that we have to remember that Rosh Zalman wasn't just a genius. He wasn't just a Rhodes scholar, a Jewish Rhodes scholar. He was a tremendous, a spiritual, I don't know the right word, sensei. I'm not sure what that exactly means, but he really understood people spiritually. He had a sixth sense for it as well. And when he wrote a book, as I mentioned before, psychologically, he really did a great amount of research into the case studies of all types of people. But on a mystical level, he understood the soul. And the soul doesn't change, even with iPhones. So he wrote a book that he says books don't work for everybody. But this book, for some reason, seems to have very wide appeal. And I gave the two reasons. He really did a lot of he was a genius, and he did a lot of personal counseling before he wrote it. And he was a spiritual master. And he had insight to the soul. And that doesn't change. But he wrote it as a book because he wanted to help those that sought his advice. And like everything, sometimes when you take a step back and you're forced to do a vehicle that is not ideal, like orally would be so much better. You get the Rebbe direct. But sometimes you have to do it in the lesser form, the lesser communication form. It actually widens it and makes it more eternal, as was the case here. Imagine if he didn't write this book. We would not have nearly as much access to his one-on-one advice that he committed to writing. So we're very lucky that sort of back then, I think the Hasidim, his followers, were kind of upset. Like, oh no, we're losing the one-on-one access. But in the bigger picture, this widened the message and actually made the message pass on through centuries till today. Any other questions before we go on?
Thank you.
Okay. So we're going to start with I'm not going to pull up the whole chapter, just by raise of hands, if you're able to do that. If you're a Zoom ninja, you know how to raise your hand with a little hand icon, or you could just unmute and say hi. Did anybody who got a chance to actually read a little bit of chapter 1, whether now or before? Wendy, you're a Zoom ninja. Great. You know how to raise your hand electronically. Great job. And Sharon got a chance. Very good. And okay, great. This is not.
It's Gavin. I read it.
Oh, great, Gavin. Okay, awesome. So I'm not going to pull up the chapter because that would take much longer, and I want to give everybody the opportunity to read it at your own pace. And you're welcome to email me, yhein@jewishpittsburgh.com, any questions you'd like me to. Or, again, if you're a little more adept at Zoom, you can right here and now in the chat box, you can type out a question to me or everybody, and I'll see it. Or you can unmute yourself and you can ask a question. So, it's a funny thing for
You're a Bible.
it's okay.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
Bethel wants to know what page we're on.
So if you're using the Practical Tanya,
Yes.
which is the book, which for those that have it, I'm actually reading from notes, but I'm not going to be reading the chapter aloud. I'm going roughly anywhere in chapter 1. The beginning of chapter 1 in the Practical Tanya is page 27, or if you have the link to what I sent in the email, you can look there. But probably better to look at the screen and listen and interact because it's more of a summary and some ideas. Okay. Tanya is a Talmudic term. Tanya means we learned in a brisa, a Talmudic teaching of the sages in the great academies. So it's the first word, and for different reasons, the book became referred to as the first word, although it's sort of like a technical term. Once upon a time. You don't call the book Once Upon a Time, but Tanya was taught in a Talmudic teaching. It became the name of the book, the colloquial name of the book. And there's different reasons why, but we're not going to get into that. So the Tanya starts off we have learned in the Talmud, in the tractate Nida, end of chapter 3, an oath is administered to him. And this is referring to a baby before they're born, prenatal. An oath, before the baby is born, before the soul merges fully with the body, an oath is administered to the child, and a boy or girl, him is just the expression they used, saying, you're about to be born, we're going to give you, here's an oath for your mission. The angel, says the angel, whatever that means, administers an oath. Be righteous and be not wicked. And even if the whole world judging you by your actions tells you are righteous, regard yourself as wicked. And that is the first teaching that Tanya quotes. So I want to ask everybody here, what do you think this teaching tells us and helps us in our mission in life? Anybody want to unmute themselves? Okay. So just to go on, that this is a teaching from the Talmud. The Talmud is filled with medrash, or besides legalese, it also talks some esoteric or ideas or motivational. What? Oh. So I'm sorry, I was didn't square before. In order to fulfill your mission, the Talmud tells you that you're given an oath. And the oath tells you what your mission is. The mission is be righteous, in Hebrew, a tzaddik, and don't be a rasha. I'm not going to get into the next part because it's not so relevant to the discussion today. But that sounds kind of reasonable. Be righteous and don't be wicked. I think every group can agree with that. Every religion, every philosophy. We're here to be good and not to be bad. It makes sense that our soul, before it's put into the body, is told to do that. Now, the terms in that's a translation, the terms in that Talmudic teaching is be a tzaddik. Does anybody here know what a tzaddik, have they heard the term in Hebrew or Yiddish? I want to share how that, as they've thought what it means. So if you see here, a tzaddik is actually, it means, it's not a perfect translation. A lot is lost in translation. Righteous. A rasha, the don't be wicked, is don't be a rasha. Elsewhere in the Talmud, it talks about the Beinoni, the intermediate man. That's half good, half bad. And the idea there is that, okay, if that's all there is to do, I think we're all doing pretty good. We're probably more righteous than wicked. We're doing our mission. But the Tanya, as we said before, is about an analytical comprehension. And because it's about that, hold on just one second. So you could take those terms and say, well, a tzaddik Rosh Beinoni is literally, the really good people, the really bad people, and the medium people. But that is a borrowed definition. The Tanya says it's borrowed because it's in the sense of reward and punishment. It says if you're righteous, if you're majority good, you merit, heaven, or another discussion. If someone is majority bad, and it's not like by a quantity, it's God knows what that means. Someone hits a tipping point of majority good or majority bad, then they're a tzaddik, they're good, and they go to heaven, or they are rewarded. A Rasha, someone who is wicked, someone's majority bad qualitatively, and they would merit to be punished or cleansed or have a consequence. And the Beinoni is sort of in between, and they can go either way, depending on the situation. But it's very essential to us here tonight. Hold on one second. Okay. So when you're trying to advance, to fulfill your mission in this world, you can't say, well, I'm a good person, I'm not a bad person, maybe I'm in the middle. We have to analyze what the terms mean. The Torah is a book of instruction, of spiritual instruction. And you can take things very generally, but if you take them in a way of, if you really analyze them, you get to really a lot of truisms and self-discovery. So Tanya says the essential definition of these terms cannot be just majority good, majority bad, and average. It proves it in the beginning. It's actually like a Talmudic, the first chapter. Who here found the first couple pages difficult in the chapter if they read it? Sharon. Okay. Wendy, I don't know if that's your hand is still high. Okay. Oh, it's raised. Very good. All right. So the reason was it's a lot of sources, a lot of proofs here and there. It can't be literal. It can't. The deeper definition can't be literal. It can't be face value. It's true to, as I said, it's a borrowed definition. I mean, when it's borrowed, we say someone has a heart of stone. Do they have a heart of stone? It says no. In the sense of that a stone is unfeeling, this person's heart is unfeeling. You're saying stone in a borrowed terminology. You don't mean it like it's entirely a stone heart. So it's when you say someone here is a tzaddik, is righteous, or a rasha is wicked, you don't mean it that they are just because the majority, that you're saying in the sense of punishment and reward, or classification for the world to come, or so on and so forth. Yeah, then we'll say they're righteous enough, or they're wicked enough, or they're intermediate enough. But we want to understand what these things are. It's very important because, remember, the mission, we were given an oath. You have to be a tzaddik. You should not be a rasha. We must understand what those things are and know where we fall in those things so we can steadily advance. And that is an essential definition that we're going to be seeking. If you read in the Tanya, it mentioned, though, it was a bombshell that these three terms actually are a lot deeper than we think. A tzaddik is someone, in the terms of Tanya, has never doesn't even have an evil inclination. This is one in a generation, a couple in a generation. This is not something that the average person should even strive for, because we both have good and bad in us, as is expected. We have good inclination and bad inclination, Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara. But a tzaddik, in the essential definition, is someone whose good side runs the show. There's no bad side. The bad side is, King David, he studied Torah and fasted so much that he got rid of his evil inclination. Yeah, at a certain point in his development, he didn't have a sinful drive. It was, his choice was good or better. And that's not even a goal for the vast majority, the 99.999%. A Rasha is a person who gives in to their bad inclination. Not always, even occasionally. I mean, it doesn't mean a bad person. In English, the translation is a little harsh. It's not wicked. It means a person, as the Talmud says, is that his evil inclination, or his Yetzer Hara, I'm not sure what the bad voice, the bad inclination, is his judge. It tells him what to do sometimes, and he listens sometimes, which is most of us. We're not perfect, and we follow that. The real chidush, the real novelty that he starts off in that whole sort of Talmudic back and forth of the proofs, is that even the average man, the intermediate man, Beinoni, is someone who in behavior doesn't give in to do a bad thing, not even allow harboring a bad thought, to act upon it, or even to fantasize upon it. And the whole Tanya, it wants to it uses this discussion of what do these terms mean in order we can understand different types of people, and as a springboard to the average person as well. And what the average person is really capable of with tremendous dedication. So the Tanya, as I mentioned before, it was written for people that were seeking the advice of Rabbi Shneur Zalman. And if you read the chapters, you sort of get a feeling he doesn't write what the questions were, the people's requests and advice they asked. He just gives the answers. But you can imagine people came and said, I try so hard. I want to be a good Jew, a learned Jew, a dedicated Jew who's doing mitzvahs, studying Torah, is kind, and yet I'm always being tested. I want to be kind, but then I get jealous thoughts. I want to study Torah, but then I get lazy. I want to do mitzvahs, but then I find excuses, or I get caught up in my work and I neglect them. And he comes to that question of, how is that someone who tries so hard, yet we seem to have such difficulty inside, the inner difficulty, and being pulled in both directions. Excuse me. He says, actually, the prophet says in the Tanakh that the souls that I made, God refers, the prophet speaking on behalf of God, says that God made us with souls, with drives, complex drives. In other words, if you come and you say, well, I try to do good, but I still have bad, and I'm still being tortured with like not always wanting to do the right thing, or even harboring negative thoughts or doing negative things. Yeah, if you had one soul, then you'd feel like a pretty, schizophrenic or, tortured soul. But he starts off, you have two souls. And that explains why you might want to do the right thing. And yet you have another soul in you that is pushing you to do a selfish thing. A good word for soul in the context of Tanya is drive, because soul sounds a little floaty, a little mystical, a little undefined. Here we're saying that you have two complex drives. And I'll explain with the first one. Chapter 1 only starts with the first one. It says the first one is the animal soul. And actually, I'm going to type this out, or the human life soul. It actually doesn't call it the animal soul in this. It's the same thing. It's interchangeable, but it refers it to as the nefesh hachiyunit, the vivifying. I'm saying it right. Vivifying life soul. The soul that gives you biological life and self-awareness, that is the animal soul. And I'm call it a drive, because if it's a drive, you understand you have a drive in you. It's not just a primal drive. It's a primal drive that actually has layers of it and some different faculties in it. And we're going to talk in chapter 3 about what those are. The point is, it's not just like a simple urge. It's a urge with definition and different powers of persuasion or reflection. But right now, the drive is called the animal soul, or the vivifying life soul. And why is it called an animal soul? Because an animal has one goal in life, and that's self-preservation. It's not bad. It just feels that it must. It feels its life. It wants to continue it, and it will do anything to survive. So, to a human being is created with a animal soul, or a human life soul. The fact that you, A, feel alive, and B, want to continue that, perpetuate that survival of your life, that is just a sophisticated animal soul or drive. And a good classification of why it's not necessarily a bad thing, it can actually be a very good thing, because you can survive. It tells us in the Talmud once that the rabbi saw the generation was being steeped into sin, and they prayed to God to take away everybody's evil inclination. And God granted their wish, whatever that means. And suddenly the chickens weren't laying eggs, and people weren't going to work, and there was no stocked shelves, because there was no drive there's no animal soul, evil inclination to perpetuate, having children or making money or eating. And they prayed that God should restore the evil inclination. And God did. There's good to it. There's good to it that you feel like a self. Capitalism is built upon the fact that you have a sense of self, that you want to feel successful, and it does a lot of good with it. So the sense, if you had to say what the animal soul's, a term for its drive is selfish. It's not bad selfish. It's just self-centered, self-perpetuating. Any questions on that? Okay. It mentions in Tanya at the end of chapter 1 that the reason we have this drive on the micro level is because God created us, like everything in the world that exists on the micro level, on the individual thing or creation, human being, a tree, an animal. It exists in the spiritual macro level. In other words, your animal soul comes from a supernal realm. And the supernal realm is called Klipa. Klipa is a Kabbalistic term referring to the forces of evil. As you see, the definition, Klipa means literally shell. We look at bad in this world. In Judaism, we don't look at, there's two forces. We believe everything is Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, God is our God, God is one. Good and bad come from God. And God created bad with a whole and good and everything with a whole intricate system of cause and effect I don't know if it's called cause and effect, but it's a matter of spiritual existence and then funneled into physical incarnate. So the fact we have a self-drive for survival comes from the metaphysical realm of Klippa, the level where God makes a hiding, a covering on God's pure truth within all of creation. And that's the unholy side of the universe. The unholy side of the universe is not necessarily, well, it is bad as it funnels down and people have free choice. You can do a lot of bad things. But it all starts with a God covered over himself in this world with this metaphysical layer and or veil, which is called Klippa. And the animal soul is in the micro. Every person is as the famous Talmudic passage that was made famous by Schindler's List, he who saves a life saves the world, he who destroys life destroys the world, because at a certain level, whatever exists in the micro is really reflected and was created from the macro. And the fact you have an animal soul, a selfish drive, is coming from that Klippa. Now, within Klippa itself, there's two levels of Klippa. Klippat Noga is called the shining Klippa. So the animal soul doesn't come from the really bad Klippa, and I couldn't find the definition online, but it's called the three Klippot, the three unclean Klippot. It's referring to a vision of Ezekiel where he saw like a storm cloud and like a dark cloud, I forget the exact terms, but three terms of like darkness. And that was a metaphor for the forces of evil. So in Kabbalah, it's called the three klippas, referring to the three storm clouds that Ezekiel saw in his vision. The three is where really is where impure things come from, things that are not, for a Jew in particular, we say we can't eat a pig. And that's because our mission, we were given a certain mission to deal with beyond just survival, but to really interact with everything at its supernal source level. So let's say a pig, for eating purposes, the energy, it would come, for a Jew that is, for someone who's not Jewish, it's acceptable because that's not given to them as their mission. But for a Jew who's given the Torah to not eat pig, eating the energy ingested from a pig is not good, or it's a sin, so to speak, because it comes from a supernal energy that is not redeemable through interacting. It's redeemable by sort of staying away from it. That's how we refine it. But the animal soul doesn't come from, the animal soul isn't coming from a bad place. The animal soul is from this dimension of the Klippa, which the light is intermingled. So it differs from the three Klippas, is that its spiritual potential can be redeemed by man's constructive intent while making use of the physicality in which it is vested. So a cow slaughtered according to Jewish law, humanely, etc., a lot of mindfulness and intent, can be eaten because the energy of the cow, for whatever reason, supernally, its energy was meant for human beings for a Jewish person to refine it through the slaughtering process, eat it, make a blessing, and then get energy from the meat to do a mitzvah. And that is pretty much a summary of chapter 1. I'd love to hear some questions. If anybody would like to take a go.
So this is Lee again, and I don't mean to keep jumping in,
No.
but I can't help myself.
It says,
So
it says in the Talmud, when no one's speaking up, you got to speak up. And
so in the book that I have, the Lessons in Tanya,
yep.
Towards the end of chapter 1, it talks about the 4 evil elements within: fire,
right.
air, water, earth, and the characteristics of each of those. And as you know, I mean, the chapter is loaded with information and just so much. But this was very clear in terms of its rendering. So maybe you could
Yeah.
shed some light on that.
Thank you for. As a matter of fact, let me pull it up on the screen if I can. Let me pull up the lesson just so people can see it. All right. Pull up the 4. I hope as we go on, I can make better PowerPoint slides so we can have the main bullets. I tried to do some of them, but here we go. Okay. So it speaks here, if you see on the screen. As you said, everything's really loaded, and I really welcome you to email me or to, that's probably the best way. If you have questions, if you read and I didn't clarify, because I can only do so much in an hour, but the 4 elements, it says that this soul, the animal soul, from it stems the evil characteristics. And it says, for example, anger and pride. It speaks in Jewish philosophical literature, particularly Kabbalah, that everything in the world is created of 4 elements: fire, wind, earth, and water. Now, it doesn't mean literally like a bunch of like liquid or fire. It means I guess more like a periodic element of some sort, some way of classification. Some actually compare it to matter and antimatter. I don't know the exact scientific comparison, but there's 4. Everything in the world is created. The Maimonides talks about everything's created of 4 elements, and from even traits come from those elements. So from the element of fire would come the drive of the animal soul is selfish. I exist. I want to feel it. I want to perpetuate it. So anger is a midah, a characteristic of selfishness in that way, or arrogance, or pleasure seeking. It comes from water because water makes things grow. So physical water makes things grow. So the metaphysical element of water is represents the source of pleasure in the people, the pleasure seeking. Frivolity and scoffing and boasting and idle talk come from air. Again, it's a metaphysical element of air. The animal soul, again, selfish. You talk, you talk trash, or you boast, or whatever. And sloth and melancholy, laziness, comes from earth. The earth, the metaphysical element of earth. It says also, by the way, even good. This is very key. Even good elements like kindness, like feeling good, like you do something good and you feel good about it. It feels good to do charitable giving or to help somebody. That is also from the animal soul. That's surprising. What could be better than that? Again, animal soul is not bad. It's intermingled with good and bad. So the good of it is the sense of that, like compassion. It feels good to be compassionate. Or feels like a man. It feels like a human being is compassionate or kind. Those things also, those stem from a drive of I feel myself. I want to feel good. I want to go to be able to sleep with myself at night, live with myself. When I go to sleep. At a very edelen in Yiddish, a very refined level, that is a sense of that's being directed from the self, a good part of the self, for the self. The animal soul isn't just like about eating like a pig in mud. The animal soul could want to write poetry to express itself, but again, it's an expression of self. We're going to learn in chapter 2 the incredible power of the godly soul that rises even beyond that. So that's a little bit. Any other questions?
I have a negative, but also a positive relationship. I mean, if there's a negative, then there's always a positive. that corresponds with it.
Everything is about free choice. Everything has opportunity. That's one of the key things, that God created us in God's image. It means God created us with free choice. It's one of the definitions.
Yeah.
And Tanya explains here we're really, what I say Tanya is doing, it's really crystallizing what your choices are. Crystallizing them, or, bringing them down to the core. So that's why, and in the first 8 chapters, we're going to really analyze the psychology, the makeup of the soul, or the drive, or the psyche, and to really pinpoint it. It's like like in therapy, it says you can't name emotions, you can't really deal with them properly. A big part, a lot of times, of therapy is naming emotions and getting like a lexicon of knowing what's going on in you. So the Tanya does that. Plus, it tells you how you're made up on a deeper level. So when certain emotions or thoughts or whatever comes up, you know how to deal with them, or at least you know where they're coming from, and then you decide how to proceed. Anybody else?
Rabbi, I have a question about the book Sparks of Tanya that you had mentioned and
Yes.
then put up on the screen. When I looked on Amazon, there were 2 different ones I saw, Sparks of Tanya 1 and then Sparks of Tanya 2.
Number
Which
one.
is
Number one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, number 1 is there's actually 5 books of Tanya, believe it or not. The one we're just doing one of them, the most famous one, but there's another 4 books that are part of it. And
Okay, thank you.
anybody else? Okay, I guess that pretty much ends tonight's class. Thank you all for joining. I hope this was useful. We'll see you all next week. If you registered, you'll get an email. If you didn't, email me, so I have your email and I can put you on the weekly Tanya reading and reminder and link list. You'll get that.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
My honor and pleasure.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I want to highly recommend, if you could read beforehand, you would, I think it'll be really, it might sometimes be very difficult, but it's okay. You struggle with it. You won't get a lot of it, but you'll get some of it, and you might have some good questions, and it will broaden your exposure to different parts of Torah, which is really, really good, because the Tanya calls from so much. So struggle with it, and you will reap the fruit of that.
Night. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you very much.
All the best.